Hey there, guys. Alright, today we are back with some more extra history, and this time we're going to start the battle, Operation Barbarossa series. This one, the Battle of Kursk, Part 1. Before we dive in, make sure you go and check out the links in the description box below. I would love if you join the Discord and follow me over at Twitch. And please do go check out the gaming channels here on YouTube. One of them is long form stream, it's just the streams that I do over at Twitch, and then the other one is shorter edited content that hopefully is funny. Please laugh and go follow that one, because I don't know, I'm enjoying the editing process over there. I'm having a good time with it. Yada yada yada. All that said, let's get into Operation Barbarossa. Ooh, straight into it. No prologue, no preamble. All right.
Thanks to the folks over at Wargaming, over the next few weeks, we're going to be bringing you
Oh, this is an early extra history video. Okay.
an additional set of extra history episodes to talk about the Battle of Kursk, the largest tank battle in world history.
Oh, wait. The series is the Battle of Kursk. Operation Barbarossa is episode 1. Okay. Oops. I'm stupid.
But first, we need to set the scene. It's June 1941. For
My
weeks,
bad.
Nazi Germany's forces have been building along the eastern frontier. Nazi Germany and Soviet Russia have been working together since the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact of 1939, but that's all about to change.
Oh, his hair. He's got like a patch there and Ribbentrop. Ugh.
The ideologies, policies, and war goals of these two nations have always been opposed. Tensions have been mounting since the exclusion of the Soviet Union from the Axis alliance between Japan, Italy, and the German Reich. Conflicts over the Balkans have been escalating. Peace cannot last. On the 21st of June, it's time. Panzers race eastward, tearing through the Russian lines. Surprise is total. Moscow's in a state of shock at the invasion. The Soviet troops fight bravely, but their
In August, 5 Soviet tanks laid a clever ambush.
leadership has been gutted by the vicious Stalinist purges. The Wehrmacht juggernaut cannot be stopped. Thousands of Soviet planes are destroyed by the Luftwaffe while still on the ground. Within hours, the Germans have decimated any semblance of command. Suicidal orders from Moscow demand a counterattack. Soviet troops either attempt counterassaults or withdraw piecemeal. Over the next few weeks, hundreds of thousands of Soviet soldiers are captured and sent back to serve as slave labor in the German camps. And in the Balkans, the German troops are hailed as liberators by people looking west for salvation from the brutal Soviet regime. But not all is quite as rosy as it seemed for the Nazi Reich. Despite the incredible losses suffered by the Soviet army, an unacceptably large number of Soviet troops had been able to slip through the gaps between the racing panzers and the infantry mired in crossing the muddy and insufficient roads of the rural European East. And despite the destruction of so many Soviet aircraft, the front the Germans were fighting on was simply too expansive to control, and they'd lost too many pilots and planes in the Battle of Britain. The Luftwaffe simply could not maintain total air superiority in the east. And whatever goodwill the people of the Balkans had toward the invading troops was lost almost instantly due to the ever-mounting number of Nazi atrocities, crimes against what they considered to be an inhuman race. For the rest of the war, there would be almost constant resistance striking the Germans behind the front lines as the army tried to push even further east. As the push east continued and the summer rains set in, the advance slowed. Meanwhile, the Soviets began to reorganize. The holes in the leadership left by Stalin's purges were filled. Competence began to trump ideology when appointing officers. The communication structure was improved, and some semblance of a coordinated battle plan was drawn. The first coordinated resistance came.
Damn, we're getting a lot of information really fast. We're 2 minutes in, and okay. And I have something I want to say, but I think I'm gonna save it for the end. I want to see exactly how. I want to see the episode in full before really saying this. It's in regards to how I like. You know what? I'll say it now. Operation Barbarossa and this initial invasion, the initial invasion of the Soviet Union. There is so much going on that obviously it cannot be covered in a single episode. Well, I think so far they're doing an all right job with with it because I understand the reason why they're doing it. They are doing it to catch people up to speed so that they can properly set up the Battle of Kursk, the momentum of it all, etc., its importance and whatnot. And exactly, also probably my assumption, my guess is they will also probably bring up the question of, like whether or not had the Germans won, would this have affected anything? The answer is no. um, but my guess is, knowing extra history, I feel like they'll probably ask that question or whatever, and then also bring up the fact that no, it wouldn't have changed much. Um, but Operation Barbarossa itself, it's going, for my tastes, going this fast, um, leaves me more lost and overwhelmed. But of course, this is also a very early episode of Extra History, so I'm gonna give them a pass.
Came at Smolensk. Thousands of Soviet tanks rushed west in a desperate attempt to halt the German advance. 500,000 men on each side clashed in one of the largest operations to date. It was a disaster for the Russians. Hundreds of thousands more Soviet soldiers were cut off and shipped back to Germany as slave labor. Thousands of tanks were left burning husks in the Russian fields. But as much as this might have appeared to be a total German victory, the Soviet attack had slowed the German advance, costing them time and material that they could not afford, and splitting their command. Many of the German generals wanted to race for Moscow, to keep their forces concentrated and focus on the one objective that might end the war. Hitler instead ordered the army to disperse and capture industrial and agricultural centers around the...
And again, I believe that the German generals are very fucking stupid and completely forgetting history in that regard, and Hitler is actually this here is Hitler making the smart decision, because Russia has lost Moscow before, and that didn't change anything. That didn't end the war, right? Napoleon, one of the greatest generals in history, lost, and he had taken Moscow. Now, of course, there are other extraneous circumstances there. The capital of Russia at the time was St. Petersburg. Did he capture St. Petersburg? I feel like he did. Did he? I can't remember. Anyways, but yeah, like, and also, yes, Moscow is the heart of the Russian railway line, but again, the way Russia fights, that taking Moscow just isn't, I don't know. I stand by that taking Moscow would not have ended the war. Now, of course, we do not know that for a certainty. We do know that Stalin had a fucking mental breakdown in the opening weeks of Operation Barbarossa. But outside of that, you can't make for certainty whether or not Russia would have surrendered had Moscow been taken. The evidence that we do have in regards to to Moscow being taken through history leads me to point towards no, but also, right, the Soviet Union made Moscow the capital, which I don't think it had been in the other times it had been taken. Man, I'm really trying to pull shit from the back of my mind, and I don't remember anything.
USSR. By September, Nazi German forces were surrounding Leningrad in what would become one of the most desperate and probably most
Oh, damn.
deadly sieges in all of history. What the Germans hoped to be a quick victory would drag out in a brutal battle of attrition for years. By October, bad weather began to set in, and the Luftwaffe's ability to control the sky became severely stretched. By December, the Soviet Air Force had even achieved superiority in some sections of the front. Though offensives had stalled on other fronts, having at last culled the Soviet army to the point where the Wehrmacht nearly matched it in sheer manpower, Hitler ordered one final desperate push on Moscow in the fall before the Russian winter truly set in. At this point, though, supply lines were a problem. Fuel, munitions, and warm clothing couldn't be transported over the vast distance between the German industrial heartland and the Moscow frontier in time. German divisions were undermanned, and replacements, when they could be found, struggled to make it across the bombed-out roads from Europe to the front. Still, the initial month of the offensive seemed a success. German troops pushed through the defensive rings around Moscow. By the beginning of November, forces of the Third Reich were at the very gates. But the troops were exhausted. There were no reserves. They'd been fighting continually in the ever-worsening Russian weather for months. The troops needed to rest, but every day the Soviets drew in reserves from its vast territory to the east, regaining strength. By mid-November, the ground froze, and the final push into Moscow began. But the temperature dropped. In early December, it was sometimes as cold as minus 48 degrees Celsius. The fighting was brutal, and the winter itself claimed many lives. It was too much. The drive on Moscow stopped. Operation Barbarossa had failed. Then the Soviet counterattack began. Week after week, they rolled back the German line. The Soviet forces were better prepared for this harsh winter, and began to regain their footing against the freezing and exhausted forces of the once unshakable German army. But even as the German offensive stalled in the north, a new objective was decided upon in the south: Stalingrad. By summer of 1942, the Wehrmacht began driving toward its new goal, and towards oil fields in the south of Soviet territory. By the fall of 1942, it was clear that the oil fields wouldn't be captured by the onset of winter, so all eyes turned to Stalingrad. The leaders of both nations decided this was the line. No land beyond the Volga, declared Stalin, and Hitler demanded that this city named after their foe must fall. Within days of the offensive's beginning, the Luftwaffe had reduced the city to rubble. But rather than...
Honestly, Stalin, this is a personal opinion here that I have absolutely no real evidence to back it up with, but I kind of want to lean towards the belief that Stalingrad would have been a much harder loss to Stalinist Russia than Moscow ever would be. Like, yes, Moscow is, again, the metro heart, the railway heart of Russia entirely. And there is, of course, lots of leadership there in Moscow, but they probably would have fled by the time the German army got there. But Stalingrad, yeah, is named after Stalin. That is a moral, a morale boosting, destroying victory. A boost for the Germans and a destruction. Is it just a name? Yes, but also names have a lot of weight, especially in wartime. Especially cities named after your dictatorial leader. And then also not to mention, you take Stalingrad, then they would have cut off the oil fields from the rest of Russia. So they really should have been targeting Stalingrad from the fucking beginning here. Not at all going for Moscow. But yeah.
In surrender, the
That's my
Soviets just
personal
dug
belief.
into the ruins of the city. Fighting was brutal house-to-house combat. Grand strategy broke down into 1,000 small actions of a handful of men fighting for the bombed-out remains of a factory or an apartment building. But both sides just kept sending men into the meat grinder that was Stalingrad. By November, the Germans had pushed up to the very banks of the Volga. But even as German troops were approaching the Volga, the Soviets had another plan taking shape. The Germans had been so focused on the city that their defensive line along the front around the city had weakened. This German army had been so used to being on the offensive that it had let its defenses slip, and the Soviets planned to make them pay for that mistake. Soviet forces smashed through the thinly defended lines around the city, crushing the Romanian forces that were supposed to serve as the flank for the German 6th Army in Stalingrad. Rapidly, the Soviets closed the circle. The 6th Army was now pinned, with their forces from Stalingrad on one side and the Soviet counteroffensive push on the other. Initially, a breakout was suggested, but members of the Luftwaffe convinced Hitler that they could provide supplies by air to help the pinned army fight on. But it was nowhere near enough. The trapped forces began to starve. Every day, more of the planes so desperately needed for resupply were shot down. A push to relieve the forces was made, but stalled out, as the trapped forces were too exhausted to make a breakout, and their commander was unwilling to defy Hitler's order to hold firm. At last, the Soviets offered surrender terms to the 6th Army, but the offer was rejected because of Hitler's order. The trapped, hopeless troops fought on. Finally, by the first days of February, resistance collapsed. But even when personally captured, the commander of the 6th Army Group refused to surrender. As 1942 turned into 1943, with setbacks in North Africa and the imminent possibility of an Allied front in Italy, there was one last possibility for the Germans to regain the offensive and prevent a collapse in the East. Join us next time for the real beginning of the Battle of Kursk.
I see what this. So this is a two-part. No, it's not, because that's just preparations. Okay. Well, that was the Battle of Kursk, Operation Barbarossa Extra History Part 1 by Extra History. Oh, well, at this time they would have been known as Extra Credits. I remember. That name change is what, only 2 years old now? Man, has it been that long already? Shit. But yeah, this was okay. I mean, this was one of their early episodes. This is like 8 years old or so. So I don't think it's bad in any sense of the meaning there. Um, it just, it's a good, it's one of those good kind of intro. So it's something you kind of play, I would say, in a high school history class to just quickly go through Operation Barbarossa, to and to also like bring up some sort of discussions perhaps to happen in class. Um, Beyond that though, right? Yeah, it's just I don't think they necessarily fell into any of the problematic traps that can happen when talking about Operation Barbarossa. Um, like the sort of myth kind of things. I don't think they fell into any of those. I didn't catch anything that was wrong. Um, yeah, so I think they did a good job here as an early, this is being one of their first early episodes. Um, so yeah, I think Operation Barbarossa is something that maybe I think it's something that they could have maybe skipped over, um, and just gone into the immediate build up to the Battle of Kursk, because I feel like most people are kind of when you're watching World War II content, I feel like this is kind of something that you're already aware of, and so like a series on the Battle of Kursk just to give me the immediate build up, the battle, and then the aftermath of it, right? At least that's how I would want it. But again, I do understand why they chose to start with Operation Barbarossa, um, and stuff like that. I understand. I just disagree. I also think it was a bit too fast paced for Operation Barbarossa because there's, so much happening in that span of time that I think it's just kind of, for lack of a better word, wrong to try and cover Operation Barbarossa in such a short amount of time, if that makes any sense. But that was this episode. I hope you guys enjoyed. Remember to hit that like button and subscribe for more, and I will see you guys in the next video. Peace.